I moved into a small house on a quiet street after turning 25. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even planned, really. More like, stumbled into. After college, I'd bounced around, roommates, sublets, half-hearted job stints in places that never felt mine. I wanted something still. Something soft. So I found this house, low roof, uneven fence, creaky porch steps, and signed a lease faster than I should've. But it felt right. Like maybe nothing amazing would happen here, but at least nothing bad would either. The city's slow. Trees lean over the sidewalks like they're eavesdropping. People wave when you drive past. And somehow, the quiet started to feel like a kind of permission. Like, here, I could be nobody and be okay with it. Christina lived next door. Early 40s, I'd guess. Maybe a little older. But you wouldn't know unless you were really looking. She had this composure, like someone who'd already lived through her worst year and came out of it knowing exactly what mattered and what didn't. Her hair was dark, always slightly tousled like the wind had a habit of brushing it just right. She wore linen a lot, loose pants, simple blouses, and it looked better on her than any tight dress would've. Our first real exchange was over trash bins. I was dragging mine to the curb, and she waved. Said, "Welcome to the block," with a smile that didn't try too hard. We talked about pickup days and where the best bagels were. Just small things. But even then, something about her stayed with me. The way she spoke slowly, like she wasn't afraid of silence. Like she wanted to hear herself think before she let someone else in. I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, I noticed her, sure. You don't not notice someone like Christina. But I was too wrapped up in settling in to consider more. But little things stack up. Like the way her porch light was always on before sunrise. Or how she never seemed rushed, even on weekdays. She kept a herb garden. Played old records when the weather was warm enough to open the windows. I started noticing more than I should've. Her laugh when she talked to someone on the phone. The way she'd tuck a curl behind her ear when she read on the porch swing. And then the glances. That's where it shifted. It started innocent, her waving while I trimmed hedges, me nodding while she brought in groceries. But somewhere between "good morning" and "need help with that," our eyes started to hold longer. She'd pause in her driveway just long enough. I'd linger at my mailbox even when I had no letters. Then came the coffee. She showed up one morning, no knock, just the sound of footsteps on my porch. "Brought too much," she said, holding out a travel mug like it was nothing. And maybe it was. Maybe it was just coffee. But my hands warmed around it differently. Some mornings she'd bring fruit. Leftovers. "I made too much pasta again," she'd say. Or, "Try this, my sister swears by this recipe." It always came in a little Tupperware dish, her handwriting on a piece of tape. I started looking for her. I didn't mean to. But I'd find myself opening blinds early, checking if her car was still in the driveway. When I'd hear her laugh float across the yard, something would shift in my chest. And maybe that's when I knew. When I caught myself waiting. Not for love. Not for anything I could name. Just her. It started on a Sunday. One of those late summer afternoons where the air feels thick but not unbearable. I was on my porch with a fan blowing weakly beside me, trying to convince myself that watermelon and cold water could pass as dinner. Then Christina showed up. She didn't knock. Just stepped up with a smile and a watermelon tucked under one arm and a folding knife in the other. "Figured we could split it," she said, like it wasn't the most charming, casual thing someone could do on a hot afternoon. I got plates. She cut it open on my porch railing, the juice running down her wrist, and we just sat. We didn't talk much at first. The crickets did most of the work. The sun drifted low behind the trees, and the slices disappeared one by one. Our knees were close, but not touching. Eventually, she said something about how the neighborhood used to be louder, back when more kids lived on the block. "It's quieter now," she said, not with regret, just observation. "Not bad, just different." I told her I liked the quiet. That I wasn't used to it, but I liked it. She looked at me for a beat and said, "I think quiet people recognize each other." That stuck with me. We talked until the stars came out. Not about anything big, music, bad landlords, why watermelon tastes better outside. But it felt like the kind of night you remember, even if you don't know why. She sat on the railing, one leg up, hair loose, shadows brushing across her face every time she leaned into the porch light. And then, this is the part one still replay, she touched my hand. It wasn't dramatic. Just her fingers brushing mine while she laughed at something I said. But she didn't pull away. Neither did I. That night, I didn't go inside until she did. She paused by the steps and turned to me like she was about to say something. Instead, she just nodded, smiled that soft half-smile, and disappeared into the dark. The next night, she came over again. No watermelon this time. Just 2 mugs and a blanket. We sat on the steps. Her shoulder leaned against mine for a long time. I stayed the night. It wasn't planned. We didn't talk about it. It just happened. Like we were pulled there by something slow and quiet and inevitable. The morning after, I found her robe hanging behind my bathroom door. A toothbrush beside mine in the holder. Neither of us said anything about it. But when I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, hair up, making toast, like she belonged. After that, things moved in this odd rhythm. She'd show up some mornings with muffins or something she made by accident. I'd find her curled on my couch after work, legs tucked under her, reading a book like she'd always been there. One weekend we drove to Asheville just to get out of town, and we didn't tell anyone. We stayed at a little cabin, walked through art galleries, held hands in public like we weren't afraid. But when we came home, we stopped touching the second we crossed into our neighborhood. It wasn't a relationship, not officially. But it was. Her robe hanging in my closet. My sweatshirt draped over her kitchen chair. Her favorite cereal in my cabinet. It was all there. Just, silent. Hidden. We didn't talk about what this was. We didn't need to. There was this unspoken agreement, whatever we were building, it didn't belong outside the walls of our houses. Her friends didn't know. My coworkers didn't ask. In public, we were just 2 people who happened to live next door. But at night? We were everything. We fell into a rhythm so natural, it almost felt dangerous. Like the kind of thing you don't want to name out loud, because it might vanish. Mornings were my favorite. She'd sit on my porch in her robe, knees pulled up, coffee cradled in her hands. Sometimes we'd talk. Sometimes we wouldn't. She liked that. She once told me, "There's something rare about silence that doesn't need fixing." And I knew exactly what she meant. I started noticing the tiniest things, how she hummed while doing dishes, how her nose crinkled when she read something annoying, how she always left the bathroom light on when she showered because she said it reminded her of when her son was little and afraid of the dark. Little details. Unnecessary, but unforgettable. I never asked about the past. She never asked about the future. It was just us. In this small, quiet space we didn't let anyone else into. We had rituals. Wednesday night dinners, usually something simple like pasta or roasted vegetables with too much garlic. Sunday mornings meant the flea market, where she'd touch old picture frames and ask me who I thought the people in them used to be. We watched old movies on her couch, mostly black and white ones. She loved the slow pacing, the long silences, the way people stared at each other like words didn't matter. I loved the way she rested her head on my chest during the quiet parts. One night, the power went out during a thunderstorm. No warning. Just a flash, a pop, and darkness. She lit candles like it was a game. We sat on the floor with flashlights and crackers, whispering like kids at a sleepover. And in the middle of that, somewhere between the thunder and the laughter, she kissed me in this slow, weightless way. Like nothing else existed. I remember thinking, this is the kind of moment people forget to notice while it's happening. But there was weight to it. Even in the lightness. Especially then. Because that whole time, I think we both knew it couldn't last. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the window for too long. Or flipping through mail she didn't open. She never said she was hiding something, but the way she'd turn quiet after certain questions told me enough. The question, "What are we doing?" hovered, unspoken, between us. It never came out. It just lingered, especially on the nights when I'd leave late and she wouldn't walk me to the door. Or when we'd brush past each other in the grocery store and pretend not to know each other too well. One evening we went to Asheville again. Just a 2-day thing. A hike, a cozy restaurant, a night in a motel that smelled faintly like cedar and old magazines. We laughed more than we had in weeks. Took pictures of murals and bought cheap postcards. But on the drive home, something shifted. Her hand was in mine, but her gaze was out the window for most of the ride. I didn't ask. I just held on tighter. That night, while brushing her hair in my bathroom mirror, she said, "I used to dream about a life like this. Quiet. Soft. But dreams aren't meant to last forever." I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything. I just stood behind her, watching her reflection blink back tears she pretended weren't there. We went to bed that night without touching. She left early the next morning. The next few days felt off. Still polite. Still warm. But not the same. Like we were walking back from a place neither of us had meant to travel to. Then, one night, over a bowl of soup I made too salty, she looked at me and said, "I've been thinking of selling the house." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. But I knew. It was coming to an end. Not because of a fight. Not because of a betrayal. Just time. The next week was filled with soft goodbyes we didn't call goodbyes. Dinners that lingered longer. Movies we never finished. One morning, she hugged me like someone remembering something instead of holding on to it. And then one night, we sat on the porch with our coffee mugs, not saying anything for a long time. The air smelled like rain. The wind had cooled. She touched my hand and said, "Thank you for this chapter." And I left. After she left, the street felt different. Not emptier, exactly. Just missing something. Her house stayed empty for a while. The porch light flickered occasionally, like it hadn't figured out she was gone yet. Her chair, the one she always curled up in with a blanket and a book, sat untouched. Dust started to collect along the windowsill. The garden she used to tend, basil, rosemary, a stubborn tomato plant, began to wilt. I didn't touch it. It felt wrong to. I stayed on the same street. I had no reason to leave. My lease was good, the rent was low, and I told myself I was fine. That people move. That neighbors change. That life keeps going. But inside, I was a little lost. I started dating someone new. A woman from work. Nice, smart, thoughtful. We'd go out to casual dinners, talk about deadlines, make plans for the weekend. She'd laugh at my bad jokes and tell me stories about her dog. It was easy. Safe. Exactly what everyone says you're supposed to look for. But nothing felt like Christina. She didn't drink her coffee black. She didn't listen when I was quiet. She filled silences because she thought they needed fixing. And every time she touched my arm, I flinched, not because it hurt, but because it didn't feel like something I missed. It just felt like something that was supposed to work. And it didn't. One afternoon, I passed Christina's house and saw a real estate sign in the yard. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, pretending to check my phone. The curtains were drawn. The mailbox had been emptied. It was just a house now. Not a home. Not a universe. People asked less about her over time. They stopped saying, "Have you seen your neighbor lately?" or "Didn't she used to keep that garden?" It's strange how quickly people vanish from conversation. Like they were never really there. But I remembered. Not just her. Us. The night she fell asleep mid-sentence with her head on my shoulder. The time we tried to bake bread and ended up laughing so hard we dropped the dough on the floor. The quiet mornings. The late-night porch talks. The silence that never needed filling. And sometimes, when I walked past her house, I'd pause. Just for a second. Long enough to remember the way the porch creaked when she stepped onto it barefoot. The way her shadow would stretch across my window when she came over without knocking. She had this calmness that lingered even after she was gone. I thought I'd dream about her more. I didn't. But every now and then, I'd hear an old record playing through someone else's window and feel something stir in my chest. Not pain. Not longing. Just recognition. Like, I knew her. I really knew her. And somehow, that was enough. Almost. Then, one spring morning, it happened. I was at the farmer's market. Just a quick run, eggs, apples, maybe a loaf of bread if they hadn't sold out. I wasn't thinking about her. I was just, existing. Moving through the crowd. The sun was out, and a little breeze caught the scent of lavender from one of the nearby stalls. And then I heard her laugh. It wasn't loud. Wasn't even right next to me. But I turned so fast it startled the guy in front of me. There she was. Different, somehow. Not younger. Not changed in a way I could explain. But freer. Her hair was shorter, tied up loosely. She wore sunglasses and held a cloth tote full of vegetables. She looked lighter. Like time had been kind. I didn't hesitate. I walked up to her. She pulled her glasses down when she saw me, and her face softened into that same quiet smile I hadn't realized I missed so much. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she echoed, almost like she didn't believe it. We hugged. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't desperate. Just, real. We didn't talk long. A few minutes, maybe. Caught up in broad strokes, how her move went, how I'd been keeping busy. She said she was renting a place downtown now. Smaller. Quieter. She liked it. We didn't say, "Do you remember?" or "Wasn't that something?" There were no apologies. No questions. Just the comfort of two people who had once known each other deeply and were still, somehow, familiar. Before we parted, she said, "It's good to see you." And I said, "Yeah. You too." And it was. After the market, I kept walking. I didn't rush home. I didn't call anyone. I just wandered, my tote bag swinging at my side, still carrying apples I barely remembered buying. It was warm for spring, one of those days where you can feel summer peeking around the corner. I ended up back on my porch with coffee in hand, even though I didn't need it. The cup warmed my fingers, and I sat in silence, watching the breeze tease the leaves. I don't know what I expected after seeing her again. Some kind of unraveling? A flood of old feelings? But that wasn't what happened. Instead, it felt like slipping into a memory you didn't know your body still remembered. A familiar rhythm. A soft echo. She'd been gone long enough that life had filled in the space where she used to be. But seeing her, even for those few minutes, had opened something. Not a wound. Just a door I'd quietly closed without locking. Over the next week, I kept thinking about that hug. How natural it felt. How she smelled faintly of orange peels and something floral. How we didn't say anything we didn't need to say. And I realized, maybe that's what love is, or was, or whatever word you're supposed to use for something you don't fully understand. It's not always fireworks. Sometimes, it's a glance in a crowded market that makes everything around you go still. I didn't reach out to her. She didn't reach out to me. And yet, she was back in the air somehow. In the way I moved through my house. In the songs I played while cooking. In the extra coffee mug I set down on the counter before realizing I was alone. The woman I'd been seeing noticed something. She didn't say it right away. But one night, while we were watching a movie, she paused it and looked at me and said, "You're somewhere else lately." I didn't lie. I just said, "Yeah. I think I am." She nodded. Didn't ask. Just leaned back into the couch and let the silence stretch out. A few days later, we broke up. No fight. No drama. Just two people who realized they weren't where they thought they were. After that, the silence in my house felt familiar again. Not empty. Just mine. I started writing more. Nothing serious. Just thoughts. Fragments. Little memories I didn't want to forget. I wrote about the watermelon. The porch lights. The hike in Asheville. The way her hair smelled like rosemary in the morning. Not to send. Just to remember. One afternoon, it started raining, slow, quiet, polite rain. I stood on the porch with my coffee and watched it drip from the eaves. The street shimmered. The trees glistened. The world felt softer somehow. And in that stillness, I thought about her. Not as a dream or a regret. Just as someone I once knew in the deepest way you can know a person, quietly, gently, without ever fully holding them. She had said, "Thank you for this chapter." And I realized, maybe that's all some people are meant to be. A chapter. A memory you return to when the world gets loud. A softness you keep in your pocket, folded and worn, like an old letter you never sent. Sometimes I still see her around. Once at the bookstore. Once at the park. We never plan it. We never stay long. But there's always a glance. A warmth. No promises. No expectations. Just the quiet recognition of someone who once mattered. And maybe still does. I stayed on the same street. Not out of sentiment, not really. It just worked. The rent was still manageable, and I'd made enough peace with my own silence that I didn't need to be anywhere else. My house changed slowly, new curtains, different rugs, an upgraded coffee maker. The kind of shifts you make when you're trying to convince yourself you've moved on. But Christina's house stayed the same. For a long time, no one moved in. The for sale sign came down, but the windows stayed empty. Sometimes I'd walk by at night, and the porch light would flicker like it had a memory of her, too. There were days when I swore I saw her shadow in the window. Days I stood outside and almost walked up the porch steps just to sit where we used to. But I never did. It wasn't mine anymore. Maybe it never had been. Once, I caught myself standing at my own sink, staring out at her house with a dish in hand, water still running. Not thinking. Just remembering. The way she used to water her plants barefoot. How she'd hum under her breath without realizing it. How she always tilted her head when she was thinking, like she was listening to something only she could hear. The new tenant showed up in June. Young couple. Dog. A blue Subaru and wind chimes that clinked all night. I didn't introduce myself. Didn't want to know their names. Didn't want to hear someone else's laughter spill from the porch where I used to trace the edge of her mug with my thumb. Instead, I stayed on my side. Watched their dog dig up the tomato bed. watched them repaint the shutters a darker color. And when they played music, it was never records. Just Bluetooth speakers and playlists with no scratches or skips. Time passed. It always does. Work stayed steady. Friends moved in and out of orbit. I tried dating again, here and there. Coffee dates, drinks, the occasional second or third meetup. But there was always a point where I'd pull back. Where I'd feel like I was trying too hard to recreate something that was never meant to be repeated. No one knew about Christina. Not really. I never told anyone the full story. Just let them assume she was a neighbor I used to talk to, someone who moved away, someone unremarkable. But she wasn't. And that's the part that stayed. Sometimes I'd find her in the smallest things, a certain kind of tea on the grocery shelf, the way the late light caught in a glass bottle, the sound of a spoon against a ceramic mug. Ordinary things that meant nothing to anyone else. But to me, they were pieces of something I still carried, quietly, without needing to say it out loud. And I wondered if she thought of me, too. Not often. Just sometimes. Like on a rainy Thursday or when she heard a song we once slow danced to on my living room rug, barefoot, a little wine drunk, the record skipping right in the middle of the second verse. Did she remember that? Did she still have the scarf she left in my drawer by mistake? I never knew. I never asked. But I hoped. And maybe that was enough. Because not all stories need a resolution. Some don't end with closure or a conversation that ties it all together. Some just pause. Softly. In the middle of a sentence. And the rest? The rest lives in glances and porches and coffee cups. In the hush between two people who once knew each other so deeply that even silence felt full. Spring came again, soft and slow, and with it a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in a while. Life had settled, not dramatically, just enough. The house stayed tidy. I cooked more. Even started going on early walks, which felt like something she would have teased me about. "You're turning into an old man," she'd say, stealing a sip from my mug before handing it back with a smile that meant she'd never stop. The neighborhood kept changing. Kids moved in. People repainted their fences. The wind chimes from the new tenants next door jingled constantly. And I started to accept that the quiet we shared belonged to another time. And then one morning, it rained. Not a storm, just that light, rhythmic drizzle that sounds like a memory. I sat on the porch with my coffee, the same mug I always used, the handle slightly chipped. I watched the rain pool in the cracks of the sidewalk and thought about how, when we were still, whatever we were, she used to say she loved this kind of weather. "I like how it makes the world hush," she'd said once. "Like even the sky knows when it's time to be still." I looked across the street, past the wind chimes and the blue Subaru, past the years that had folded themselves neatly between then and now, and I remembered. Not in a dramatic way. Not like a punch to the chest. More like the way you remember the lyrics to a song you haven't heard in years. Just soft. Familiar. And that's when I realized, I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping for her car to turn the corner or for some message to light up my phone. I wasn't even wishing we could start over. I was just remembering. And that was enough. Because some stories don't end. They don't need to. They just live in you. Quietly. Like a light left on in another room. You don't see it all the time, but it's there. Constant. That afternoon, I walked downtown. Not for any reason. Just to move. The air smelled like wet pavement and lilac. I passed the bookstore we'd once ducked into during a summer storm. The one where she found a copy of an old poetry book she loved and read from it in the aisle, not caring who heard. I went inside. The same book was still there. Different copy, same title. I picked it up, flipped through the pages, and found one she'd read to me once while lying on the couch, her feet tucked under my leg. I bought it. No hesitation. When I got home, I wrote her name on the inside cover. Not to send. Just to keep. Because that was what she became in the end, not a heartbreak, not a mistake, not even a ghost. Just someone I knew deeply. Someone who changed the way I understood stillness, warmth, timing. And in some quiet way, she was still with me. In the way I listened more. In the way I let things be. In the way I let myself feel, even when it hurt. Sometimes, when the rain taps against the window, I sit on the porch. Coffee in hand. No phone. No music. And in the silence between the raindrops I think of her. Not always with sadness. Not with longing. Just with memory. Because some stories don't have an ending. They just need to be remembered.